Welcome, Troy. Thank you so much for taking time out of your weekend to come share your story. I know you were already doing sessions today, so I really appreciate it. We first met many years ago. You were volunteering as our Trail Life Troop
Yes.
chaplain. Well, I had shared about how we had just had baptisms at our church,
hmm
and it was heartbreaking, all but one or two of the high schoolers had suicidal ideation or
Right.
attempts.
Right.
And they all said that they felt lonely and unloved. You had shared that you had a really hard childhood experience as well.
My childhood trauma started about 2 months before I turned 6. I was raised by a single mother here in Arizona. I'm the youngest of three, and my grandparents also lived with us. And so I called us heathen kids from West Phoenix. We didn't have a lot of the refined manners of an upper middle class. My mother married an upper middle classman. That summer, right before I turned 6, we moved to Maryland. And the first abuse my mom ever gave me was at that time of my life. The abuse was simply this: I'm an asthmatic. It was hot, it was humid. We were waiting to go swimming in a pool. And my mom was on the phone, I guess, taking care of some business. She kept telling us to be quiet. And we were fidgety, three kids. And she finally got mad and she took some duct tape and she put it around my mouth and head and had me sit on the floor in one spot. My brother, the same thing. My sister, the same thing. And as an asthmatic, that'd be like you trying to breathe through a straw for 15 to 20 minutes. And that was the first time my mom had ever done anything that was of an abusive nature to me. And I didn't understand why she would have done that to me, because was really close to my mother and I loved my mother. And just to preface all of this, I love my mother till the day she died. And she died about almost 5 years ago. In May, it'll be 5 years ago. So, but I did love her, but the abuse was there and that was hard. And from that point forward, the abuse just increased and increased. When I was 6, I had another major moment of abuse, and it was the most severe of the abuse of all the years that I was abused. We were living in Evansville, Indiana. We just moved in the house, and we had my brother and I were playing around. There were some broken windows on a garage that we owned, and my brother was like, hey, let's throw some rocks through the window. And I said, what if we break some of the other little panes? He goes, well, he's going to have to replace all of them anyway. So we were playing a little game with the rocks, and later on, my mom found out that she said we broke all the windows, that they were not broken. And the punishment that was given to both of us was 50. That's 5 and a 0. Swats with a belt. And I'm 6 years old, and they were counted. And that was the
Hmm.
most severe beating until I was 12. I had the same beating when I was 12. And, it's one of those things that I've come to grips with, and I've forgiven my mom for. And that's part of my story. That's part of my testimony, is that I did forgive my mom. So from that point on, the abuse continued. There was a lot of physical abuse, a lot of mental abuse, a lot of emotional abuse. I am ADHD, and being an ADHD kid, I mean, we don't have all the executive functions we need, and so sometimes, our behavior is what it is. And we were not medicated. To this day, I'm still not medicated. The doctor said either medication or what I have is some coffee. And so I drink a lot of coffee. The caffeine helps regulate me. But my mom, dealing with the ADHD in us, dealing with wanting us to behave in a certain way, our abuse went forward, and just a lot of emotional, a lot of mental abuse, punishments that were well beyond what any child should ever endure. I'm 12 years old at this point in my story and my testimony. It comes down to this. I was in seventh grade, and in Missouri, where we were now living, because we moved in and out of Arizona due to my stepdad's job. So I'm living in Missouri. All of the seventh graders went to one school in the whole city. And that's like 300 to 400 kids, all seventh grade, all in one school. And we had new, like, class to class kind of mentality. The second week of seventh grade, the school had a conference with my mom, and they showed her my grades, what they were going to be if they didn't improve. And they said I needed to learn some study skills. And my mom knew how to say the right things to the teachers in the school. And she said these words. She said, "Well, I'm going to take him home. We're going to have him sit at the table. He's going to learn to study. I'm going to help him study, and that's what we're going to do." And we got home, and that's not what we did. She told me everything out of my room but my clothes, my bed, and my school books. She said, "When you get home from school, you're going to come in here. You're going to study. You're going to eat in here away from the family. You're going to stay in here. You're going to study. If you have to go to the bathroom or take a shower, you can do that. But other than that, you're in this room. And on the weekends, you're in this room. And if we go somewhere, you're going to sit and study wherever we go. You're not going to be able to play." And the exception to that, ironically, is my mother was an atheist, but she let me go to church. And I was going to a little Baptist church in Missouri. I'd been going to church throughout my life. Every time we moved somewhere, someone would knock on the door and bring us to church. And so I grew up knowing about God, believing there was a God, knowing that Jesus was the Son of God, having a head knowledge but not a heart relationship that I needed. And so this year became a very miserable year because I was bullied at school. So I hated going to school. And then I'd come home from school and I would be, if I walked in the door even a few minutes later than my mom thought I should, I was yelled at. I might have got spanked for that. Then I was in my room. My brother would bring my plate to me for food. He couldn't talk to me. He would just set it down and leave. Later on, he'd come by and pick it up and take it away. The first time I saw him, I was so excited because I'm ADHD. I'm wanting to talk to people. I'm sociable. And my brother said, "I can't talk to you. If I do, I'm going to be in trouble." And so the entire school year basically was me living in that room under those conditions. I didn't know how to study. My mom didn't help me study. In fact, I saw my mom maybe 5 minutes a day. At the end of the night, she'd come in, tell me, to get ready for bed, and that was it. And so it was a very hard year. Only way I survived at home was I was a reader, and I was reading 2 chapter books a day. I read a lot. It was kind of interesting because I had about 2 weeks into the school year, or 2 weeks into my situation, the librarian told me I couldn't check out books anymore. And I'm like, "Why?" And she said, "Well, you're taking 2 books home every night, and they're chapter books, and you're bringing them back the next day and turning them in. Some other kids that would want to read them don't get to read them because you're just taking them home and you're not reading them." And I said, "I am reading them." And she says, "Well, you can't tell me you're reading 2 chapter books. These are big books." And I remember one of the books, I don't remember the other one, but one was Ramona Quimby, Age 8 by Beverly Cleary. I like Beverly Cleary books. Some of you might know those books, some of you may not. She asked me, like, "Well, tell me what this book's about." So I told her what that book was about. She asked me the second book. I told her. And she goes, "Okay, I want you to take out books. I want you to show them to me before you go. And the next day when you turn them in, you turn them into me." She quizzed me for a week and realized, "Yep, you're reading these books." And she didn't know why. And the reason why was it was my survival. I had to escape the reality. I didn't know how to study. I would spread books out around me like I was studying something. So that year, my survival was reading. But even with that, I started having a lot of suicidal thoughts. We had grown up around guns. Yeah, my stepdad was a gunsmith for a hobby, so we had guns in our house, and we learned the gun safety. And I knew, you don't point a gun at someone unless you plan on using it. And I remember one day, the first time I ever really contemplated suicide, I had a gun, and I held it to my head. And I had 2 thoughts, and those 2 thoughts were simply this. Number one was the thought of it's going to hurt really, really bad. And I don't like pain. Even if it was for a second, I didn't want that level of pain. Thought number two is an interesting thought because it's a series of thoughts that gave me the final thought that I needed. The first thought was, I'm going to mess it up, end up in a wheelchair, and my mother will have to take care of me, and that won't be fair to my mother. So those 2 thoughts that day were enough that I took the gun away and I put it down. I walked away. And I had other thoughts. One of my thoughts was I stood over a road cut. I'm terrified of heights. I'm standing over Interstate Highway 50 or 51 there in Jefferson City, Missouri, road cut about 100 feet above the road. And I thought, if the fall doesn't kill me, the cars will. And then I thought, but it's going to hurt really, really, really bad. And there's a chance I might live and I'll end up in a wheelchair and my mom will have to take care of me. And those two thoughts, again, protected me. Now, as a therapist, I know what those thoughts are called. They're called protective factors. A protective factor is anything you could think of that would make you want to walk away from suicide. And I only had two of them, just two. And then one day later in the year, I was watching a bus come down the road. I'd failed seventh grade. I'd been through some therapy for failing seventh grade. And in that therapy, I actually did come to a point where I said, someday I'm going to do what this guy does. He was good, but he never asked me about suicidal thinking. And if he did, I either lied to him because it never came up in therapy. And I do remember the therapy, so I don't know. He realized, the therapist did, that my mother was the problem. And I told him he's right, but I couldn't tell him what. And he gave me two chances to tell him, and I was seconds away from saying the words. It all started when I was 5. The therapist came close to helping me, but he missed it. And I did declare I wanted to someday be a therapist. He proved to me he was pretty smart. The first time I saw him, I thought he was. I said to myself, "This guy's stupid. He doesn't know what he's doing." And to tell you where my mindset was with my level of intelligence, then my first session with this therapist, he would ask me a question, and I answered every question with a question. And he just wrote something down, and we did that the whole night. I call it 20 questions. It was a lot. It was more than 10, and people like rounded numbers, so I figured he had 20 of them. Into that session, I said, "This guy's stupid. He doesn't know what he's doing." The next session was about the family therapy, where my mom did all the talking about, I'm just lazy. I don't even try. I don't care. And she tried so hard to help me, but I just didn't want the help. And, that was the second session. The third session, I thought, well, here's this stupid guy again. And, he asked me a question, and I smiled because that was my game. I answered him with a question. And he looked at me and he answered my question with a question, and I answered it, and he smiled and he wrote something down, and we did that whole day. And I said, "This guy's smart. Someday I'm going to do what he's doing." I was 12 years old. I knew I was going to be a therapist. I was 47 when I stepped into the field. But in my life, I did a lot of other things that were also of importance to me. So anyway, back to where I was at. So I'm watching this bus come down the road, and I had the two thoughts. It's going to hurt really, really, really bad. And the other thought I had was, I'm going to end up in a wheelchair because I'm going to fail, and my mom's going to take care of me, and that's not fair to my mom. And then I said probably the scariest thought of my life, and that is, I don't care. And I'm watching this bus come, and I said, I don't care. And I can just tell you this, my world got less bright. It was like black and white vision. I heard no sound, and I felt numb. And I took one of two needed steps to get in front of that bus. And the only thing that saved me that day was that bus was moving faster than my thinking. And I did have two protective factors. And so because they slowed me down, the bus missed me by about that far in front of my face. The wind blew back, life exploded, sound came back, light came back vibrant. Like I said, when that bus missed me, it was like the realization I almost died. And I had a really good thought. And that good thought was this: I don't want to die, but I can't live without love. And so I'm in a dilemma for a week. I'm in a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. At that point, I am at the end of my school year. I'd already failed, so my mom was no longer keeping me in my room. And we lived near some woods. And I was walking through the woods a week later, and I'm thinking to myself, I can't live without love, but I don't want to die. And that dilemma was on my brain. And I just remembered in churches growing up, all those years that I was allowed to go to churches, there were always usually some either older lady or man. Of course, I'm 12, so everyone was older. But they would always say, if you have a problem too big for you, go to God. God will give you an answer. And so I'm a week beyond that bus incident. And I said out loud, God, no one loves me, not even my mother, and I can't live without love. And I don't know what I expected that day. I really don't know, but I just had to give it to God. And what I got is not what I expected. I had a thought enter my brain. And the thought word for word, said, "That may be true, but I love you enough that I sent my son Jesus to die for your sins. And if you accept that, you'll know love. And if you don't, you'll never know love." And
Wow.
you would think you would think that I would have jumped on that right away, and I had to be sure of this love because I couldn't live without love. So I made a deal. I said, as long as you promise you'll always love me and never leave me, I will accept that. And another thought entered my brain that day, and that thought said, I will always love you and I'll never leave you. And I think it was about 4 years later where I actually saw that was at scripture. So I said, as long as you promise me that you'll always love me and never leave me, because I can't live without love. And the next thought that went through my brain is, I will always love you, I'll never leave you. And a few years later, about 4 years later, I found out that was scripture. And that was really kind of cool because, you know, those thoughts were real. People want to challenge them. I have a lot of atheists that want to challenge me in my thinking. I'm like, you cannot deny my thinking. And so that was the moment that I became a believer, a born again, not just head knowledge, but heart knowledge. Now, I didn't share that with anyone. I didn't share my suicide with anyone either until I was 20 years old. I was in the Navy. I wanted to become I was a medic, a corpsman. They call them corpsmen in the Navy. And to work with the psychiatric unit, I had to go to a school to become basically a version of what I'm doing right now, a therapist. And to go to the school, they require a 1 month session with a psychiatrist, at least once a week. And the psychiatrist I worked with me for a month and a half, 5 days a week for an hour every day. And it was very intense. He heard my entire story. I thought, I'm never going to make it. He's never going to approve me for the school, and he did. He approved me. And I said, are you kidding me? I said, you heard how crazy my childhood was. And he told me this. He said, everything you did in your childhood, other than one thing, was what a therapist would tell you to do. And I said, well, what was that one thing? Now, this is part of my story that I didn't share yet. I'm going to go back a little bit. I was a year after my salvation. I endured more pain and suffering in the home. I didn't want to leave my mother, but I knew I wanted to go live with my dad. But again, I didn't want to hurt my mother. And I thought telling her I want to go live with my father, who had just retired out of the Army, that would hurt her. Anyway, I went through this intense psychology, the therapy, and he approved it. So a year after my salvation experience, my mother got upset and she kicked my brother and I out. And I'm going to repeat her words. These are going to be a little bit harsh, but she said, "I don't care if you live, die, or go to hell. I don't want you in this house when I get home from work." Now, that looks and sounds like, wow, that's horrible. But for me, those were freeing words. I was free to do what I wanted to do. She just gave me permission to go live with my dad. So I went to live with my dad. I was 13. It was the summer. Again, it was the summertime right before I turned 14. I wrote my mom a letter. I didn't have a therapist tell me not to send it. That's what they called the unsent letter. And I didn't understand why I wouldn't want to send it until this psychiatrist told me why not. But in that letter, I told my mom, I started off with a list of things that she did to hurt me. And it started when I was at that age of 5, again at 6, and it went through all the way up until the very last day I was with her. I analyzed my mother. Again, I was destined for therapy. My analysis, people go, well, how much could a 14-year-old analyze? So here's what I said, word for word, to my mom. I said, I don't think you meant to harm us kids. I think you like the idea of having kids, but not having kids. You wanted dolls you could play with and put on a shelf and take down when you wanted to play with us, and we were not dolls to be played with and put on a shelf. When you married our stepdad, he put expectations on you that were higher than you could handle, and you didn't know how to make us behave the way he wanted to because we were poor heathen kids from Southwest Phoenix. And so the only way you could get us to try to behave the way he wanted was for the abuse. So that was my analysis of my mother, of why she did what she did. Then I made a choice to forgive her because I needed to do so. I created what now I understand are called boundaries. I said, I'm never going to come live with you again. And I said, and you'll never hurt me again. And I listed out 3 reasons why. I told my mom, if you want to know me, write me back, but I'm never going to come live with you. If you don't, I hope you have a good life. And I mailed it. Now, no one told me to write the letter. No one told me why I shouldn't have mailed it. The psychiatrist in the Navy said, you should not have mailed that letter. He says, but it worked out good for you. Now I'm asking him, well, why shouldn't I have mailed this? And he said, well, think about it. She's your abuser. I'm like, right. Why shouldn't she know what I wrote? And he said, think about it. She's your abuser. And I'm thick. I'm 20 years old. I said, tell me, doc, why? Why shouldn't I have done it? And he said, she could have wrote you back a very abusive letter and hurt you again. He said, the letter itself is healing and you don't need to mail it to be healed. And so I tell a lot of people the unsent letter, and there's ways you send it, you destroy it any way you want to. And it's like delivering it. So unsent letters can be done for grief. They can also be done for abusive situations. He approved me to be a psych tech, and unfortunately by then the school had closed. With that, that's my testimony story is up to that point in my life. The letter, the moment I sent it, I felt the best I'd felt since I was 5. And I analyzed myself and I said, what did my mother take from me when I was 5 that I just got back? And I came up with 3 words. She didn't respect me, she didn't value me, and she thought I was worthless. And I thought that she took them from me. But I've learned since then that she couldn't take them from me because they're attached to who I am. And my perspective now is every human being is born with dignity, value, and worth. Dignity, the right to be respected. Value, we are part of the world around us. We give to the world around us. And worth, I define worth as simply this: we are not trash to be thrown away. When we are abused, we don't see who we are as a human being. But those 3 things still exist. Sometimes we abuse ourselves and we don't see who we are. If we're doing drugs, illicit sex outside of marriage, other things that we might do, we don't see who we are as a human being, but we're still the human that God created us to be. And so DVW therapy, that's the name of my therapy, which you stated earlier, is dignity, value, worth therapy. And it's a lot to write that down on a business plan to say I'm dignity, value, worth therapy. So I do DVW. I abbreviate it that way. And I have a therapy for people who are suicidal on recognizing who they are as a human being, because it healed me, completely healed me that day. I went forward with a lot of strength. Now, there were times where I would struggle. If someone said something abusive or did something abusive, I would struggle. And then I would remind myself, I know who I am. I have dignity. I have value. I have worth. And I got to a point where if someone does such a thing to me now, the moment I feel myself fall down, I pick myself up and I say, my dignity, my value, my worth is not dependent on what that person said or what that person did. I know who I am.